Dregs One, welcome to another episode of the History of the Bay podcast, sponsored by the good folks of Amoeba Music, San Francisco, the good folks of Dying Breed, San Francisco, where you can get your custom gear and your graffiti supplies, and blankslaps.com. If you use the promo code DREGS, D-R-E-G-S, you will receive 10% off your order for all your premium eggshell sticker needs. Today in the house, we got DEO on the boards, we got King Said and Rocky Vision behind the lens, we got the homie Skino in the cut, and today, I'm really excited because we have a special guest, somebody different than our typical guests. He is an entrepreneur. He is an activist. He is a designer. He is a Frisco legend. Champelli is my rally man, as the great Mac Dre once said. Today in the building, we got Champelli. What's up, man?
Man, what's good, my brother? Man, it's an honor to be on the podcast. I've been watching what you're doing and just super juiced about all the episodes. Check them all out. And, man, just proud you just putting on for the city. And just, man, love, man, it's all love. And I'm just happy to be here, you know what I mean? And, man, I love what you're doing, for sure.
Right on, bro. Right on. That means
shit.
a lot. I appreciate the support, man. And you have a really interesting story. Some may know, some may not know. But I just want to dive in, do a deep dive into the whole Champelli history, man. So, first of all, I know you were actually born overseas, correct?
Yeah, I was actually born in Spain, but came like when I was like 1.5, 2 years old to San Francisco. My parents were separated. My mama came to the city, and we landed in the Tenderloin, and that's where we kind of started out, and then ended up moving to Bernal Heights from there after that.
Right.
And then pretty much grew up there the rest of the time.
So most of your earlier memories are not in Europe, it's here in the city.
Yeah, no, my memories is all, San Francisco pretty much, yeah.
So what was it like growing up in the city?
Man, growing up in the city, I mean, back in those days, it was, another time, obviously more of a, I don't know, I guess you could say more of an innocent time, you know what I mean? Compared to now, everything was like another pace, and, interesting kind of growing up during, the emergence of hip hop, breakdancing, kind of like freestyle skating, just skating was really coming on. And obviously graffiti was like a big wave at that time in the 80s, when I was like kind of like actually growing up and like out there doing it as a kid, So, I mean, the city was like alive and thriving with, breakdancing and music and skating and, graffiti everywhere and just, just dope shit was all, everybody was doing dope stuff. But the only thing at that time, there was no social media. There was no real, cell phones even at that time. Later on in the 80s, obviously people started getting brick phones, little bag phones and shit like that. But, at that time it was all film. Everybody was 35 millimeter, film or, some VHS tapes that were like big ass video recorders with VHS tapes started coming in and documenting stuff. And then obviously film, 35 millimeter actual film before then. But, so it was a whole nother time, you know what I mean? For sure. Definitely different here in the city. And, this is like literally like kids is out in the streets playing football and like, it was like a whole nother vibe back then for sure.
Yeah, that city neighborhood vibe.
More community, more neighborhood vibe for sure. And all the neighborhoods, you had a lot more of that, more community feel. And people were here. Everybody kind of knew each other and they're growing up here, and that I kind of like, that's the void that we kind of experience now in San Francisco. That kind of culture and community has kind of been, sucked out of the city in a sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you say like the fact that pretty much everybody knew each other. I always like to say it's like 1 degree of separation in San Francisco. Like if you're from Frisco, I know at least one person that knows you. I
mean, honestly, that's what I say. San Francisco and even sometimes the greater Bay Area. It's a very small, it's almost like when I meet people from here and I'm like, you almost feel like it's like family in a way, you know what I mean? Like truly, and people I think gotta like look at it more that way, you know what I mean? Because it is only a couple degrees of separation. If you're doing some fuck shit over here on one side of town, it's gonna catch up with you. It's not, it's too small of an area the Bay Area to really, I mean, it's just like it's really small. You know what I mean? You really, like you say, you can start talking to somebody. Next thing you know, they know somebody that you know. Is like it's almost instant. You can find somebody that you guys have in common or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And when you speak of all these things emerging, the graffiti, the hip hop, the skating, like those are also like real organic things that you grow up with in San Francisco. And when I look at like a lot of our mutual friends, like I notice you have like friends in all these different spaces and people who go on to do some really cool stuff in these spaces just happen to be like people you grew up with or went to school with or knew from around the way.
Yeah, I mean, all those things that we're speaking of are like community building things, right? You're doing art, you're doing, whether it's graffiti or any other type of art, or you're doing music, or, even skateboarding, you're building community out there with people. And it is, there's a lot of greatness has come out of the Bay Area, you know what I mean? A lot of great people and a lot of great minds have come out of here. And honestly, like this, California in general, and especially the Bay Area, is like a driver of the culture, like throughout the world, actually. We basically influence the world as much as, a lot of people maybe don't recognize it or wouldn't want to care to admit it. But this is one of those areas that is super influential. And, it is a blessing to have grown up with really some great minds and great people putting like really interesting projects together and just doing great things, coming from nothing, coming from skateboarding, coming from, slanging weed, coming from graffiti, watching people, turn their dreams and their passions into something really interesting and go on to be even billion-dollar industries.
Absolutely. And we from the Bay sometimes get a lot of flack for like always bigging up the Bay and people accuse us of trying to take credit. But like you said, that worldwide influence is real, especially when you think of throughout the 80s and 90s, all the people from around the world who were visiting Frisco, visiting the Bay, going to Embarcadero to skate, coming out here to paint graffiti, coming out here to Oakland to be a part of the music scene, and visiting and taking that back with them to the places they came from.
100%. Yeah, no, I mean, I have a ton of friends that in the early 90s, were moving here from different areas and different places, coming from all over and calling this home and doing art and graffiti and skating. And I mean, we could sit here and name off some greats that came here, did their thing, and then blossomed and went on to the other places and stuff. But definitely they all kind of point back to the Bay Area and San Francisco as like one of their inspirations and where they cut their teeth and got their skills and got a lot of game. And then from there went on to take that and shape it into something great,
This episode of the History of the Bay podcast is brought to you by blankslaps.com. This website is the #1 source for you to get eggshell stickers. They just sent me a pack. Look at this variety, man. You can do all types of stuff with these. These are the real deal eggshells, different colors, different sizes, custom stuff, real unique brands. Blankslaps.com has it all. They also have plenty of graffiti supplies, such as these markers. They got gear, they got apparel. These stickers are really dope for anyone who's looking to do some writing, some bombing, or even just some casual art, have something around the house, have something fun to work on, and make a great gift. And if you use the promo code DREGS, DREGS, that will give you 10% off each order. So make sure that you go check out blankslaps.com, tap in with the promo code DREGS, and get you some of these high-quality eggshell stickers as soon as you can. Check them out, give them the seal of approval, and we appreciate them supporting the History of the Bay podcast. Is there anyone in particular that you came up with in those times that really inspires you with their journey?
I mean, definitely. There's definitely a lot of people that, I could think of. Just for example, Stevie Williams, he spent a lot of, in the early 90s, spent a ton of time here in the Bay, and he considers this his second home, you know what I mean? And that's the homie.
And Stevie, he was one of the first wave of like pro sponsored skaters, correct?
He was like not so much the first wave, but definitely that 90s wave.
90s wave.
Yeah, that 90s wave, because honestly, in the 80s, there was a whole nother wave that came out of the Bay Area. You got Steve Caballero, you got Tommy Guerrero, you got all types of other big names that all basically came out of the Bay and were here skating in SF and called this home, you know what I mean? So there was a lot of like super pro, pro skaters that came out of here. I mean, even Tony Hawk was around here. Like, I mean, a lot of big names really fucked with the San Francisco super heavy. You know what I mean? So yeah, there's a lot of people that came out of here and were inspired by this. Huff, you got like, there's a lot of, Nicky Diamond is another, he's a native San Franciscan that came out of here and went on to do his thing, you know what I mean? Another example of somebody who kind of, rose to greatness out of the Bay Area, doing his thing.
So it sounded like skateboarding in particular, it really gave you that early sense of community back then.
Yeah, for me, honestly, it's a little bit of everything, because I kind of I'm kind of like one of these guys who's a little bit Renaissance, man. I kind of got my hands in anything like creative and stuff like that. I mean, I skated. At the same time I was skating, I was doing graffiti, so it kind of went hand in hand for me, you know what I mean? And then also I was breakdancing, so it was like a little bit of all of it is like building community to different degrees with different people and stuff like that. But it's kind of like just that overall, thing that ties people together in these different sectors and everything like that. And a lot of it, there's a lot of overlap, obviously, and a lot of connections between all of those things that tie together, whether it's music, weed, cannabis, skating, graffiti, like, a lot of the stuff is shared within those spaces,
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. I mean, you just get that exposure to all of it just through your friends and even just the stuff you see making your way around the city.
Yeah.
But I believe that you have a different finger in all these different areas and all this experience, but you're most known for your pioneering work in the cannabis field. Mm-hmm. And so how did that journey begin? Because from what I understand, it's something that started early for you.
Yeah, so cannabis, I had a little bit of just growing up, a little bit of family background, essentially, like, older brothers and stuff like that. So I was kind of around the game and also just cannabis at an early age. So that kind of obviously, helped mold and shape, and whether it was good or bad, basically affected my, my hand in cannabis and my perception and how I related to the plant and stuff like that. But I started smoking at a super young age. I probably started smoking actually in elementary school up here at Buena Vista, right across from La Raza Park, is the first place I rolled up some leaf with the homies, like in 5th grade. And was like trying to smoke there. And then I later on went on to starting to grow my first grow, which is on Bernal Heights, which is like right up the street from where we are right now too. At my mom's house, I started growing there in like the pantry with the cats and the dishes, and it was like had a little skylight, and I had, got some seeds from some other weed that I'd smoked, some bag seeds, and it planted that, and it got that going right in my mom's pantry. And she was, my brother had actually grown there earlier on and stuff, so I kind of peeped game with that too, watching him like get some plants, but his stuff didn't never turn out exactly like how my shit turned out,
Yeah, I can imagine. And so Moms was cool with this, or are you keeping it on the low?
Yeah, no, Moms was like, it was kind of, she was definitely sweating me, because I'm over here, in middle school starting to grow weed in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and, and then starting to like hustle and shit like that. So we was always kind of butting heads, unfortunately, about those things, because I was kind of, I was acting bad in a sense, you know what I mean, at that time.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, the thing is, here's another tweak about growing up in Frisco, bruh. feel like damn near everybody has sold weed at one point in your life. You go to the dentist office and like the dental assistant might sell you a sack, bro, or like she knows a guy, or like you go to McDonald's and some dude might have it behind the counter on the low. Like damn near everybody I know, including my, damn near everybody I know has moved a little bit of, you know what I'm saying, at one point or another. What do you think that is? Does that go back to like the hippie movement, the Humboldt County proximity? Like, what is that, bro?
San Francisco used to be like, the home of the hippies in a way. You got Haight Street in the 60s and the 70s. I mean, right up the way here, you got Pot Hill, which was like famous for its weed, actually, because it had the best climate. It's a hill in San Francisco that used to get the most sunshine. Everything else would go foggy, and Pot Hill would still get sun. So they'd grow the best weed up there on Pot Hill. I used to get some fire from there. But, ultimately it comes down to, it's just part of the culture here. Cannabis is one of those things a lot of people growing up around and consumed or used or whatever in one way or another. There's always people's involvement through that. And San Francisco is one of those cities that's like a little more open and liberal. And at one point, it really was kind of like the mecca and ground zero of like new genetics and new strains and new stuff coming through. Like the best weed in the world is honestly kind of come out of San Francisco and California and the Bay Area. Like as long as I've known, I've been in a lot of spots and a lot of places and traveled and seen weed throughout, the 90s and stuff, early 90s, late 80s. And honestly, this is the best weed I've ever seen in my life, always came out of San Francisco.
Yeah, I think we've always been spoiled in the sense to where that's always kind of been normal. And then like even having that understanding of the hustle, the economic opportunities that is provided, because I've done my share of traveling too. I remember my first time in New York, this is like early 2000s, and I saw what they was trying to sell me out there, and I'm like, man, first of all, this dude don't even understand how to make this sale properly, you know what I mean? Because I'm about to get over on him. And then second of all, like he's trying to offer me like his best shit, and this is nothing compared to what I'm used to. And then also just like the tolerance of it, the fact that like I feel like compared to other places in America, like blowing weed in public, walking down the street, smoking a blunt is like a regular thing, whereas like in other places I've been, it's more like, no, we got to get out the way. And
yeah, so, obviously, shouts out to Northern California was growing ultra fire too, San Francisco. But yeah, ultimately, like, it was one of those things where it is a little more lenient, San Francisco itself and Oakland. Once you got outside of these city limits, say you went up north, I mean, San Francisco's that way. You go 30 minutes.
You go to Daly City.
40, you go to Daly City, you're washed. You could be driving through, they're pulling you over in 2 seconds in Daly City. So it's like, it's a unique little, ecosystem here. It's got its own little environment, you know what I mean? As far as like you go 30 minutes any other direction out of here and it's all bad as far as weed goes, you know what I mean? Or in the past, and just in general, like what people are like, and just everything changes pretty quickly as soon as you leave the city,
Yeah, because it's really interesting when you're talking about growing a weed plant in middle school and kind of having your introduction to the game. It's like when most people start dealing with weed as a kid, it's just like maybe, smoke a joint here and there. Yeah. Were you like kind of learning about this whole cannabis culture and this culture of hustling at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up kind of in the late 80s, when I was really starting to do that, and early 90s. And I mean, at that time, I'm growing up in Bernal Heights, which is like, surrounded by a lot of, there was a lot of Frisco game, you know what I mean? I got Army Street Projects, Alamany, you got Hunters Point, you got, Highland Street Projects, you got Sunnydale, you got the Mission District, you got like a lot of stuff going on around there. And this was like during the crack era too. So it's like, there's a lot of hustlers basically in the city at that time. Everybody was getting their hustling on and doing their thing. So it's like inevitable to kind of like pick up a little bit of, at a young kind of impressionable young kid. You end up looking up to hustlers. They pull up, they got the fresh, they're wearing the fresh shit. They're pulling up on some gold ones in an old school, whatever. You as a kid, you're like, shit, that's kind of like your role model. Unfortunately, and the people like, it's like kind of what I grew up around in a sense, growing up where I did, and in that era and stuff. So that was kind of like And then not to mention my brother, rest in peace. He also was on his hustle shit so early. So I kind of like also was peeping that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I relate to that as well because like even in graffiti, I remember kind of just seeing like older kids that was like painting some ill graffiti, but they was dipped.
Yeah.
They had some little diamond stud earrings and some gold chains on and some Jordans and a pager and they had sacks online, but they would pull up real quick and bust a clean piece or something like that. And it was kind of like, whoa, it was a whole like lifestyle like of that hustle mentality, that fast talking, kind of just the eye for the fly shit. Like all that is very appealing when you're growing up.
Yeah, definitely. You know what I mean? And I mean, a lot of people, I mean, it's not a path that I like recommend or, you know what I mean, to anybody. I would say stick to the straight and narrow, follow your passions and your heart and your dreams. But ultimately, like, I had lost a lot of friends to the game and in the streets out here. I mean, it's countless, sad stories out here in San Francisco. I mean, it looks like this beautiful picturesque city, but it has its dark side too. And, so there's a lot of lost time and lives and broken families and broken hearts out here and dreams and shit that shouldn't have necessarily gone that direction. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I know you've seen your share of ups and downs in this, and we'll get to more of that in your story. But something what you just said is like finding your passion, and I get the sense as you're growing this plant for the very first time, you're discovering a new passion. Just by being, because that's a cool feeling, especially as a kid, to even be able to do that. Yeah. Like, oh, I grew it. Like, so when that first plant, when it flowered and everything, what did it did it produce something cool? Or?
I think as humans, we naturally kind of like, being in touch with the soil, being in touch with plants. I mean, we come from like cultivating nature and having that relationship with nature, and in an urban environment that a lot of that is missing. You know what I mean? There used to be community gardens in San Francisco, more of them, where you could go and have a little plot and grow your little vegetables, have your flowers or whatever you're trying to do there and stuff. But a lot of that is missing in the urban environment. And as humans, we miss that balance of the soil, and that's something that grounds us, is being in touch with soil and being in touch with plants and stuff like that. So for me, obviously, it was super fulfilling to go ahead and from start to finish, be able to like plant a seed and watch it grow and then have some flower out. It was really quite an amazing process. And within that process, you know what I mean, discovering a plant that has so many gifts and has so much healing medicine to it. And at the same time, on the other side, on the capitalism side, you could actually gain some money, in order to survive or do, whatever that you needed to do in a sense. So it was kind of like a real, it's really, the plant's always been like a blessing in a lot of ways. Aside from the legal drawbacks of it, it's always been having good blessings and positive influence, on its own as a plant,
Yeah. And I mean, after you grew that first plant, did you kind of catch something like, oh, I might be on to something, like, how do I do this? How do I make this better? How do I do more of this?
Yeah. So, I mean, at that point, I started to like add more plants in my mom's, I started to grow more plants in the pantry there. And then mom's was like, yo, hold on, you're going too crazy here. I started adding more and more plants. And then at that point, I actually had to move out. Like, so when I was 17, I ended up dropping out of McAteer, which is a high school here in San Francisco, and then getting my own apartment down on Woodward Street, which is like down by the Valencia Gardens. And I got my first apartment down there in like 1991. And that's like when I did my first indoor grow. So that was like my next thing. And not a lot of people were growing indoor at that time. Most of the stuff was all outdoor. But I decided to go ahead and get some lights and throw up some lights in this little apartment and start messing around with the indoor stuff, So that was like kind of the evolution of growing it with skylights, which is like a light deprivation thing. And then from there going into like doing it with actually controlled, light and environment.
Yeah. And around this time, like, what would you describe the quality of the weed that was going around San Francisco?
So, I mean, before that in the early, kind of in the earlier 80s when I was in like earliest of middle school, when I was first trying to find weed and get weed, there's different degrees. You could go down to Dolores Park, which is a park in the Mission District there, and you could get some Bammer weed or some brick weed, and it would just have like seeds and be kind of fucked up. Every now and then you would get some light green stuff that was cool, but it was mostly paisas or Mexicans or different people from South or Central America that would be down there in the park that would have a little paper bag hidden in the bushes or something looking like some trash, and you go up, hey, let me get in. Me and my homies would pool up $10 or $15 and go down there and try to buy some of this weed, after school, or if we was cutting school, let's go to DP. Everybody go over there and pool up and get themselves a little sack, so we were smoking whatever, we could get it. We weren't super judgmental, but later on, as time went on, weed, you tuned in and you had better connections or you started growing or this and that. Like the weed back then, honestly, was, in my opinion, was even better than it was today, just because there was more genetic diversity. Right now, everything has been monocropped and kind of narrowed down to just a few genetics that existed, because what happened in the late 80s and early 90s at that time is people didn't have the foresight to like save seeds. It was so illegal. You get caught with some seeds, you go into jail, like type of shit. You know what I mean? It was still fucked up. So you couldn't really have seeds. You couldn't be like, people didn't have the foresight to let me grow this to make seeds to keep this same strain going. So they wasn't keeping the strains going. So hella shit just went lost. You know what I mean? Everybody was thinking, this will never end. It'll keep going. All this fire weed gonna always be around, but it never was. It started being lost, over time. I watched stuff just disappear, where it was like the Indo, the super skunks, and the certain shit was just like crazy. I mean, like, I'd be on the bus coming from high school, and it'd be all the homies that would be going out to HP or whatever on the 24 and the 24 to Visadero, and they'd be blowing weed, and I'd be like, God damn, what is that? I mean, the craziest Indo, where you'd be like, fools from the Jacks would have the most best weed. You'd be like, how these guys getting that weed? I'd be like, man, it's super fire. You know what I mean? But everything started getting lost and getting diluted with time. Now we are seeing kind of a renaissance in the weed, whereas a lot of people are going back in and trying to develop new stuff, and a lot of new breeders and a lot of interesting stuff is coming out, but it's still not quite the same as like what it used to be back in the day when the first genetics started hitting here, like the real Afghans from Afghanistan and just certain shit. It was just more pure, and it slowly got watered down over the years,
That is a trip. It's almost like, and we'll get to more of this later, but like it's so corporate now. It's so industrial in the cannabis business. So what you're saying to me with like the genetic limitations of the seeds, it's almost like some Monsanto GMO type of seeds going around.
This is exactly what it is to another degree. It's like humans, we all have a hand in the plant, we're shaping the plant's shaping us. But it's one of those things that if you think about it, you go down and buy a tomato from Safeway, just a regular hothouse tomato that's maybe not organic and boutique or whatever, and it's just like, that shit barely has any taste like a tomato anymore. Like if you had like your grandma or your mom grew a tomato in the backyard, that shit had flavor back in the day, and you'd be like, God damn, this shit actually had flavor. And that goes for all the fruits, that goes for everything. They all like, what the demand is, what's the easiest to transport. Like, so we only see in certain apples when there's like 5 different varieties of apples in the grocery store, when there used to be hundreds of apples, or whatever. And so that's the same way with the tree too. You know what I mean? All right, everybody want purple shit. We just breed them for purple, and that's it. You ain't going to see no green weed for years to come. And now, you're starting to see it again. But that's just an example of how, by selection, you know what I mean? Everything, gets affected, we don't think about it, but stuff gets affected and it starts to get diluted, and, and it ain't the same as what it used to be, Yeah,
it's so interesting. And I'm just hearing like how you speak on it. It's like definitely coming from an approach of like West Coast hippie, bro. Like the connection to the earth and the changes over the time that's brought on by corporate industry. But it's like, I'm just saying that to say that like for some people watching this, they might be like, oh, they're just talking about pot. It's just like, no, there's so many layers to this culture and to this game.
there's so many layers to this game, and honestly, where we're going as humans and where the society is going and everything's speeding up to whether it's our food, whether it's cannabis, if you're smoking weed, where everything like it's all, being affected and changing and everything. And, I am super hippie. I grew up just like, really with a close connection to the earth and nature and that's just always been me. I ain't never really, fronted and I always kind of kept it real. I'm like a urban hippie, basically, you know what I mean? That grew up in the shit. You know what I mean? But I still like all about the people and the plants and the nature and the animals. And like, we got to conserve our earth and our resources and everything and respect nature, you know what I mean? And respect, have respect for people as well, you know what I mean? And different indigenous people and all these things is ultimately getting lost,
right.
When it comes down to indigenous people and everything, like they trying to wipe indigenous people off the earth and those teachings that was along with them people. And so that's the same way that's happening to the plants, to the animals, to everything, you know what I mean? And it's a certain mindset that basically is on that shit, you know what I mean? That's like trying to like, so as conscious people and, we got to like be aware of those things and start to sensitize to them things and be aware of that and try to preserve, old ways of life and real shit and real knowledge and pass it along, because a lot of that's just getting McDonaldized, you know what I mean? To where, shit's just cheap now, you know what I mean? As far as life and just and everything, you know what I mean? Knowledge is commoditized and it don't have no value and everybody just moving so fast, you don't take time to see the details and what's really going on around us, you know what I mean?
No doubt, man. And that's why I'm excited you're here, because that's what we're doing with this podcast is just laying this foundation, documenting some of these things, from the people who lived it themselves so it doesn't get lost in the shuffle of time. And I definitely relate to all that. Like, I think all of us, especially in Frisco, have that little bit of hippie in us, the Grateful Dead, that kind of community vibe, all the diversity, all the cultural movements that have come out here definitely have rubbed off on us. And it's just really interesting to hear your journey of experiencing this through like cannabis, because as a time period we're talking to, like early 90s and all these strains, right? Like, this is another thing, like the Bay has always been ahead. Like, people now, they'll go to the cannabis club and they'll be like, okay, Sour Diesel over here. Okay, let me get the White Widow, or let me get some cookies, or let me get some runs. It's like, bro, we've been had flavors. Like, we've been, like, I'm a little younger than you, but like, I came up with like cat piss. Or like mango kush, or like, you know what I'm saying? The nade we could get into is a whole nother level. And of course, champagne too. Like, we've had these flavors, and it's just interesting when I'm hearing you, like, as you talk about moving out of your mom's house, 91, 92-ish, that's also when, like, we said Bama earlier, no Bama weed drops. Total Devastation, I believe they dropped around that time. Cypress Hill. The cannabis culture is moving a little forward into the limelight, and it seems like you're like right place, right time with that shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like you say, you got the Chronic, you got Be Real, you got, you got, man, it's all happening all at that time. Total Devastation. I mean, there's a lot of Bay Area music all happening at that time, thriving, shit, Huey MC. I mean, you got like, a lot of greats, obviously Too Short and a ton of people. But yeah, the at that time, like, music and cannabis culture was like super tied, in super heavy. And a lot of it honestly gets discounted now, in a sense, how heavily music has an influence in the cannabis world, and vice versa. You like a lot of these older hip hop artists and everything, they've been smoking tons of weed since still 25 years ago. They all been smoking weed and talking about weed, you know what I mean? So for them to see all this come around now, it's like, damn, okay, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
it's like
it's a trip, you know what I mean? They're like, shit, we've been on this whole time, you know what I mean? And
actually like kind of demonized for it too a lot of times.
Yeah, a lot of them got blackballed and demonized and wasn't all the way accepted into the commercial side of music and so forth at the time, due to their cannabis, where it's now it's kind of celebrated, where people will be like, oh, he smokes weed, you know, they make a thing out of it. Wiz Khalifa, Snoop Dogg now. Snoop Dogg kind of got his flowers in that sense where he's accepted. Everybody knows he's a weed dude. They like, you know, it's like a joke. Oh, yeah, Snoop, yeah, he's lighting up, you know, whatever. And back in the day, it was still more like, you know, still shunned or whatever at that time, you know?
Yeah, so so as you were seeing this in real time too.
Yeah.
So were you also like getting involved in the music too? Like what was you're talking about moving out at 17, like did you have like a path in front of you that you were following or?
So honestly, you know, I mean, I was always heavy into the music and a big fan of music. So I grew up very much like, you know, my mom and my brother I always had a turntable around. So I was always scratching. I was making mixtapes from KPOO, like old Roxanne Shante battles or Too Short or like, you know, just endless old school hip hop shit. I was recording it and bringing tapes to school and trading it with the homies, and we'd have tapes. And then between that and like breakdancing, you know, early breakdancing and shit like that. And so I always kind of had this relation to music. And then obviously throughout the 90s and late 80s and stuff like that, just listening to stuff and being a big fan of Bay Area music, of course, you know, growing up listening to E40 and Too Short and Mac Dre and all that. I just was superly inspired. And you know what I mean? That was like that music is kind of like was in my blood and in my soul in a sense, you know what I mean? Just growing up with it and living that life, you know, and at that time and listening to that music as your soundtrack, you know. I'm driving around smoking weed, listening to RBL, Don't Give Me No Bammer Weed when it's coming out, you know what I mean? So it's like one of those things, I'm in the moment, living this shit, listen to the Cypress Hill, you know what I mean? You know, and all these different groups, you know. So yeah, so that definitely was part of my inspiration to going on and starting to do music. And there was a big wave in the Bay Area of compilations and stuff like that, where everybody was doing compilations. So I kind of jumped on that wave as well with me and the homie, who you personally know as well. And we started doing a compilation,
right.
You know what I mean, at that time. And that was kind of like me getting my feet wet. I always knew I wanted to do some kind of music, something and involvement. And that was like a perfect entry kind of point, was like, all right, let's put together a compilation with a bunch of different artists, you know what I mean? And that's kind of how I got connected with Mac Dre, Mac Mall, and, you know, Doobie and all these other artists that I was fucking
Wash
with.
House, baby.
Yeah. So me and Jonas, we was fucking around super early with the music together, you know what I mean? And we kind of like, he went on and did Wash House, and I went on and did Champelli, and at the same time we were just recording and fucking around together.
So
at the
this is pre-Wash House.
Pre-Wash House.
Okay.
It was like pre-Wash House.
So we're talking like mid-90s.
Yeah, like mid-90s, you know what I mean? And it was kind of like I had my thing going. We were trying to figure out what to call shit. I kind of started Champelli and was doing my thing. And, you know, we went to high school together, so it was coming up, we obviously had our own views and worked differently in a degree to where he's like, it became evident, like to the point of like, I just kind of got to also do my own label also, because I have my own way of working. He had his own way of working. And then we just he ended up started Wash House like kind of later on, but we were working together on the Champelli stuff for years together as well, you know, and he was a part of that early on too, you know what I mean?
I still don't understand Joe's way of working, but it works.
Mean, you know what I mean? Yeah, exactly.
He be pulling hats out of rabbits, man. He makes something out of nothing, man. But he makes it happen, man.
No, for real, you know what I mean? So we went on, you know, we was doing music together, and then I went on, he did his thing, I did my thing with the Champelli stuff, and, you know, was releasing stuff in the late 90s and getting stuff on the radio on KML at that time, and pressing vinyl and hitting all the DJs off with vinyl and pressing CDs and, you know, just doing the whole thing. So, you know, it was an interesting time, you know, working with Bay Area artists and stuff like that. It was cool.
I want to dive deeper into that, but just already, like, the hustle translates very well. Music and slang it like it kind of. If you can master one, you can master the other. It's a real, especially in the Bay.
Yeah,
just all that game, taking that same approach. So speaking of like Champelli, and we're talking about you doing your first indoor grows. Like, at what point are you developing and this is why I say when I talk about being ahead of the curve, like the marketing, the branding of strains. Like the things that like cats are doing now with the bags and all these, like this is all old school to us. And I mean, you're definitely one of the pioneers in that sense. So how was that going, like, as you started entering into that world of like branding your own strains?
I mean, a lot of the branding at that point, it was kind of like still just, turkey bags and sandwich bags and a lot of that, just because at that time, everybody was still sketched out. Like, I don't really need something that's going to lead back to me, at that time.
Yeah.
So we were still real skeptical about that. But I did dream about like, oh, we create a brand, we put it in a cigarette package. We was like already thinking all that in the mid 90s already, but it was like, we can't really do it yet. It was still kind of sketchy. But at that time I was putting out music and I had clothing shit I was already doing, and I started a clothing label early in the early 90s too, like 93 with my boy, Syra.
Oh, rest in peace, Syra.
Yeah, rest in peace, Syra. We kind of did some clothing shit, back in the...
He was doing designs for you?
Yeah, he was doing designs and cooking up. Yeah, he was ill. So, so really it was just an organic thing with the music. Me always having the champagne, aka the Champelli, just always on deck.
Wait, so that's what I wanted to get. Like, when did that become, like, when did you know you had something? Because champagne was like, it's hard to describe for people who weren't there. Like, if you had, like, I got some champagne. Like, wait, what? You got some champagne?
Yeah.
Like, how'd you get that, bro? Like, let me get a little bit. Like, nah, I only got this little bit. Like, it was an exclusive, like, sought after, highly reputable, highly, like, potent, good positive effect type of vibe. It was a very sought after strain. So, like, what point did that come into the picture where you're doing all these grows and then it turns into that?
So, I mean, the champagne, even earlier on in the late 80s and then early 90s, I was already like naming strains, and stuff like that. I would grow something. It'd be this, it'd be that. I'd have different little names for shit. And the champagne was just one of those ones that I always had it enough at the right time with the musicians. And there was just an organic thing that happened of everybody smoking it and mentioning it in music, and it wasn't contrived or like, yo, here goes some weed, mention my, shit. It wasn't any of that. It was just them mentioning it organically. When Dre, is dropping the Pelly name in 6, 7, 8 songs, it's all like organic,
the
you know
most,
what I mean?
He might have given you the most shout outs.
Pretty much, damn near, you know what I mean?
And real quick too, I gotta point out the shout out to my boy Cloud City Art, who just blessed us with this new painting of Dre for the studio. Check him out on Instagram, Cloud City Art. Thank you very much for that. It's very fitting as we start speaking about the late great Mac Dre. But yeah, he had a lot of love for you, it sounded like.
Nah, for real. No, we definitely it's interesting because when I first was listening to Dre before, in high school before I had met him, you know what I mean? When he's doing his album in jail on the telephone and all that shit was my favorite shit, you know what I mean? To finally kind of meet him and do our thing together, you know what I mean? And it was honestly, a real dude, real good, genuine dude, you know what I mean?
What was the first time you met?
Man, first time we met was at G-Man Stands down in Hayward, which was a studio down in Hayward. Had an SSL board, and he had just got out of jail, and Mac Mall had brought him through the studio to do a song with me and Joe, actually, and we was like, basically for trying to put together our compilation still at the time, so he had come through, you know what I mean, and so that was that's how it kind of all began, you know what I mean, it was just us messing around and making one song, and then from there just led to a friendship from there, he'd always come out to the city and fuck with us all the time. And it was it was definitely some interesting times at that point,
Yeah, I mean, he was shouting you out up until his final album.
2004, he got shout outs of, what I mean?
She Only Sees Me with Champelli Trees.
Man, man. So, I take it upon myself to keep his name alive and his legacy alive. And you know what I mean? When people, have that much love for you, and regardless if they're a friend, I always try to keep, friends' names and memories alive somehow, So however moving forward, I'm always, putting his name out there and blessings and accolades and flowers, because man, he's a Bay Area icon and a legend out
Absolutely.
here. You know what I mean? And he did amazing things for the Bay, and it was like a catalyst at that point. You know what I mean? It really made history out here.
Absolutely, man. It's cool that you got to be a part of that from behind the scenes.
Yeah, for sure.
So as like Champagne is spreading on like a street level, on a word of mouth level, on a music level, because the music out here is so connected to the streets that what's going on in the streets
100%.
influences the music so much, including the type of weed that's going around. And then so you do, what was the first compilation called with you and Jonas?
I mean, those Game Plan was the first compilation that we kind of put
Crest
together.
Side Game Plan?
Yeah, it was like the Game Plan. Yeah. That was like kind of, and it evolved over the years and like changed, because by the time we actually ended up putting it out was like way later, you know what I mean? So it kind of evolved, and I mean, and music is one of those things, like, depending on the music, if you don't put it out right away, it kind of got it got a little bit of a shelf life, in a way.
Gets a little stale to your own ears.
Yeah, that's what it is, yeah.
Oh, yeah, there we go, right there on the screen. Right,
Yep.
is that it?
Game Plan, that's it. Yep, Doug One on the art, actually.
Is that right?
Shout out to Doug One. Yeah, man. That's the homie right there, Doug One. A lot of our early artwork, we was fucking with Doug at the time, you know what I mean? He was doing a lot of our covers and artwork and graphics and shit like that.
Shout out to Doug, man.
Yeah.
So much under his catalog. So this you were working on this before Wash House came into existence.
Yeah, we worked on this before Wash House came into existence. Yeah.
So you're learning like through trial and error. Like as you say, usually the reason the music ain't coming out is because you're still figuring shit out.
We're still just figuring it
Making the
all
music
out.
is one thing.
Yeah.
And then getting to actually put it together. When you're just starting out, you're like, wait, this is actually a lot of work. Like, how do I do all
and
this?
then we started the compilation, and then it started leading to doing other albums, individual albums with different artists. Like I ended up fucking around and doing, a bunch of albums with San Quinn, for example, who I was, even also looking back was just like, ultimately a fan of his music. When before I even knew Quinn, I was like a huge fan of his music. You know what I mean?
Of
like,
course.
man, Quinn, this shit is, you know what I mean? I'm listening to that and GOP and the Fig, you know what I mean? And so working with him, and we did a couple albums together. We released the Mighty Quinn.
The Mighty Quinn,
which was in 2001.
And that came out on your label.
That came out on Champelli. And that actually, we got a bunch of radio play and stuff on that, and was pretty well received by the DJs and stuff like that.
And you mentioned earlier you were kind of busting moves to do that, to executive produce it and put it in rotation.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I had produced like 3 or maybe 4 tracks on there, but my main focus was being like an executive producer at that point, you know what I mean? The look and kind of, guiding the direction of the project and how I wanted it to sound. And, that project really was kind of ahead of its time for the sound in the Bay Area at the time. It's just something totally different than people had ever really heard Quinn rap on. So it was a little bit like people were like, didn't get it completely in the Bay, just because it was just different than
Is that what you were going for?
Done,
You were going for something a little more mainstream.
Yeah,
almost?
I was trying to go for something a little more mainstream. You know what I mean? I kind of tend to be like on my production side. I'm kind of like, hit orientated. My ears kind of tuned to that frequency to where I'm just trying to like, make hits, but at the same time make good music, And I learned over the years it's not really all about that, but that's kind of like what I was going for, kind of single driven sort of thing, trying to like create something like that. Because ultimately I wanted Quinn to win. I wanted him to get that exposure.
You want a viable product.
Yeah, I want a viable product, and I'm also want to see him, become the great, even greater than he already was at the time, but become a big artist. You know what I mean? Because I believed in him.
And did you first meet Quinn too, doing the whole compilation thing, or?
Yeah, honestly, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how we met. Met Quinn and met Toriano and Big Rich and you know what I mean, Bailey and. you know, fucking around doing the music stuff. You know what I mean? Explosive mode.
Yeah, that's when all that Filmo music was in full effect back then.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
D.O. was actually saying before this started how much he enjoyed that Mighty Quinn album. I think that's one of his favorite ones. And we were talking about just how Quinn represented that elite Frisco spitter. Yeah, he was like our rawest spitter, lyrical beast. That we were all hyped for growing up in the city.
For sure. And it's interesting because on that album, he like actually does go, he kind of weaves a little bit of like, you know, almost like knowledge in there too on some of these hip hop beats. It's like a little bit of it's kind of political and kind of like, you know, knowledge. Like he's spitting some game in there. It ain't just all like fluff. You know what I mean? He really coming with some shit that's, you know, pretty deep on there. If you listen to the one track, 2021, I think the track was actually called, 2021, or Q2020. Q2020, that's what it was. So it was interesting. When you listen to that song, it literally is like predicting like what was going on like 2 years ago, you know what I mean, during 2020. Like literally pandemic, all the shit, cities locked down, troops on the streets, like you name it, radioactive shit. And just like, I mean, like, he's going in on that shit, and it's almost like a prophetic song, you know what I mean? So you listen to Q2020 on the Mighty Quinn right now, you're going to hear some shit that was like almost on some Mr. Predictor shit, you know what I mean?
That's a trip.
For real,
I gotta go back
different.
And check that out.
Yeah, it's pretty deep. It just shows you what level his mind is on and where he was at as a human being too. You know, Quinn's a deep cat, you know?
Well, I think I can just hear, like you were saying, how much you had respect for him and you wanted him to win. And I think that's like the perfect combination of business and art. When you have someone on the business end that's like, yeah, okay, let's make some hits. Let's make it do what it do. But at the same time, I genuinely want the best for the artist that I'm working with. You don't get that all the time in the music industry.
Yeah, you know, we was just an independent label, you know what I mean? Just coming out the streets, just looking for alternative stuff and trying to make a new way for, you know, for everybody, you know, in a sense, you know. So we had like-minded thing. He was coming out of another record label deal, and it just ended up working out, you know what I mean? And it was just like a fair deal, and, you know, I really went in and put my all into that, and he did too, and it was a dope project. Definitely, you know, we made history in our own way, in the Bay Area at that time. You know what I mean?
Man, that's how I look at it. I respect anybody that was on the shelves, because once you're actually on the shelf and in the game, it's like you have your own chapter in this history book. That's how I feel about it.
Real, true.
And it's a trip, like I was mentioning earlier. Just that's like a classic Bay Area story of how the hustling translates to the music industry, and so many concrete dreams coming up out of somebody who managed to hustle up a little bit of change and then figures out a way to flip that into the music business. And so where you seeing this is like, you know, actually the shit is going cool, but I can't do this forever, so I do need to figure out some other avenues.
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously at that time, I'm, you know, one of those things is like, the street game and the hustle game or whatever, that shit's tiring, and you know what I mean? It's like, it's not something you want to try to do forever, you know what I mean? It's like, that shit is like, you know, PTSD to this day from just that side of shit. So it's like one of those things, you trying to find a different, you know, route and find a different way and just put it into positive things. And I've always was a creative person. So for me, music just became like, you know, just kind of like that outlet, essentially, you know what I mean? Where I could put positive energy in and try to create something new and different, and for myself and for the others around me, you know what I mean? And open up a lane. And at that time, you know, before, actually, we got in it right when there was like a serious downturn in music, but right before
like
that,
the Napster CD,
yeah, like right then it all changed. It all changed. You know what I mean? It went from analog to digital. Napster came. A lot of shit changed. You know, Tower Records was going bankrupt. Like there's a lot of shit, and you know, we ended up Quinn's project kind of suffered from that in that sense. Like there was like a lot of the shit was like Tower went bankrupt. We lost like a lot of units to that, and a bunch of other spots going under. It was just like a weird time with, you know, with music. But at the same token, yeah, we was definitely trying to make a change and make a lane for ourselves, and you know, and do some positive shit out here. And you know,
I think a lot of people were stuck, caught scrambling around that time trying to figure out. It was such a sudden shift.
It was a sudden shift.
Yeah.
It was like one of those times. It was like an instant little transition right there. I mean, I remember I bought a 2-inch machine, which is like a tape machine for recording at the time, an analog tape machine. I spent like 20, 25 grand for it. And then everything went digital. Pro Tools came out. Shit, I mean, those things was just like a paperweight then. It was like, worth maybe 5 grand, 4 grand or something like that. Like damn near overnight practically. I was like, shit, you know what I mean? But yeah, at that time, all the music we was mainly doing, we was all recording on 2-inch tapes,
Yeah.
Analog, different sound.
Totally different, man.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's hard for people to contextualize it now, but like when we're talking about the weed game back in the days, it's like a totally different set of legalities. And where did you find yourself expanding to a point where you're like, all right, this I might have to get about the game at some point sooner or later because this is getting a little too major, or I'm getting a little hot, or like how are you expanding in the game?
I mean, shit. I mean, I was kind of going crazy out here. It was like back in the days, like not everybody had weed like it is now.
That's what I'm saying.
Like now it's like everybody and their grandma got weed right now. Back then it wasn't like that, so to speak. It was definitely, way more, it was definitely hotter and, and way less people had weed like that. So if you had weed, shit was, it was different, you know what I mean? It was almost like it was a special thing at that point still, but I mean, I was definitely moving and grooving in a way that was like, kind of big at that time, you know what I mean? For the times and for just a kid that, a dropout and just come up with the street with no real education and to kind of like flip it into some tickets back then, to off of the street. That was like, damn, you made it, you feels like it at least at that time, you know what I mean? And in retrospect, it is just a piece of the puzzle and you didn't really make it, but it was like a step in the right direction because ultimately, you don't really make your, they say, you got to lose a couple million to really make your real millions, you know what I mean? So it's all a learning process and I definitely learned from it all, whether it was the music, the clothing, the tree game, all my stuff is all, my life has been music and creativity and cannabis, and all of it has just taught me over the years, then got me to the point where I am now with my brand, and what I'm trying to do now is all tools, because it's all I've been, living and breathing this whole time is just creativity and the plants and so forth, and you know what I mean? It's just been basically, honing my skills and honing me as a person to, to finally be like, damn, I can put all these skills that I have, to play, like music production, artist development, directing videos, producing, all these different things. And just honing my eye, graffiti stuff, with colors, with art, just with all this shit, is all skills that, like, I was like, who would have known that, now I could, like, put it all to use in something that I love and that I'm passionate about, like my own brand, and go ahead and, once again, try to really create something for others around me. And I'm just like, I look at it as I'm kind of like the vehicle and the conduit ultimately, because at the same time, I'm not only doing this for myself, I'm doing it for Frisco, I'm doing it for the loved ones, I'm doing it for everybody that, I lost in my life. So it's like one of them things, like, it's like means a lot,
Yeah, man, all that comes across, that your experience is getting put to good use. It's all a very positive vibe. It's nothing like greedy or like, I mean, you've already been through all the ups and downs of the game, and now you get to kind of take what you gained from that and put it towards what you're doing. So I definitely respect it, man. But you actually did end up catching a pretty big case. At what year was that?
That was like, 2001 is like when I had to end up leaving the United States. So I ended up leaving, but the case had been going on for a while, for some years.
Did I read correct? Was that a RICO?
It was a RICO.
It was a RICO.
Yeah, it was a RICO act. And it wasn't me directly per se. I was just kind of adjacent to it.
Well, that's how RICO works, right?
Yeah,
it's like a big conspiracy.
Yeah,
and if you just fit in one piece of the puzzle, they can drag you into it. And they can use what you're doing against somebody else and vice versa.
Yeah, no, that's like one of those ugly things. They turn everybody against everybody, and it's a dog eat dog sort of world. You know what I mean? And I just didn't. At that point, I chose not to be in it. I had gotten a word from my buddy's girlfriend, who was a lawyer. You know what I mean? And she had told me like, "Yo, if you could leave the country right now, it'd be a good time to leave." So I just decided to just bounce rather than stick around and find out. I didn't want nothing to do with the the legal shit out here. In the United States is no joke, man. They take your freedom and fucking, fuck up your whole life, and I'm like one of these people. It's like, man, who are they to tell, it's like, as long as you ain't doing nothing violent or hurting nothing but nobody, you know what I mean? It's like, the people shouldn't have a place to try to tell you, you got to go sit down for 10 years or something like that and take away your freedom, you know what I mean? So I was like, I'm out of here. Fuck this shit, you know what I mean? So I ended up leaving and kind of somewhat dodging the bullet. I ended up coming back before the statute of limitations and still had to kind of like sit down for like 6 months or whatever when I got back. Okay. Everybody had already been charged and all. Yeah. When I got back, it was like they didn't need me. They was like, well, shit, man, you just like an afterthought at this point. But at the time, they would have tried to press me, you know what I mean?
Well, once they have you and they slap you with this big-ass RICO charge and they're telling you all this other bullshit like, hey, guess what this guy said about you? Hey, guess what this guy's doing? Hey, guess what we're going to do? Hey, guess what the maximum sentence is? Exactly. The mandatory minimum sentence for what you're doing. Like, they can really try to jam you up.
100%. Like, I got back and did 6 months. At the time, if I would have stuck around, they for sure would have been trying to be like talking 10, 20 years, who knows, or 5, 10, 15, who knows, you know what I mean, at the time. And they fabricate shit and create shit out of thin air, you know what I mean? What if they want to, especially in that situation when they trying to threaten you or press you to roll on somebody or something, they're going to cook up some shit that have you, looking like fucking, Charles Manson, you know what I mean? Of shit.
Was that a stressful experience, like basically being on the run during that time?
I mean, yeah, being on the run definitely wasn't like a comfortable experience. You looking over your shoulder and, kind of living out of bag damn near in a way, just kind of like mobile, like, our status. I mean, I eventually kind of settled in and I ended up going to Europe. So I was over in Europe and had some good years over there and shit. That was cool, you know what I mean? And ended up growing more weed over there and making friendships over there and building over there on that side of the water,
Well, I mean, as we get to this part of your story, I think there's something really important here. Like, we're not glorifying any aspects of any of this shit, but what we do got to speak on and what has become a big issue is the fact that something we now realize has medicinal benefits that is helping people, that is essentially... It's not what do they call it? Like, it's not a Schedule I substance, controlled substance. We're not talking about serious, hardcore, destructive drugs, and how people have, and to this day, are still dealing with the repercussions of having been criminalized. It's a big issue, man. Like, when Peter Tosh and all these guys are singing about legalize it, they're not doing it just on some party shit. It's because people's lives are getting affected in outrageous ways from growing a plant.
Yeah, I mean, now you're considered a caregiver or an essential worker even, you know what I mean? And back in the day, they was ready to, lock you up and throw away the keys, essentially, you know what I mean? So we've come a long way, but there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, people are still getting, prosecuted and affected through the plant, you know what I mean? And ultimately, I mean, we know the bottom line just comes down to like tax dollars essentially, but it's like, it's not fair that somebody, whatever, they could be rolling out here with, a pound that's not, doesn't have paperwork to it, or an ounce or 2 ounces or whatever it is. Like, it's not fair that they go to jail and there's still people in a store with selling the same shit all day long. That just doesn't, that don't add up, you know what I mean, right there, you know what I mean? So obviously there's a lot of marginalized communities that have been affected by this over years and years, and they're still targeted right now. Let's keep it real, you know what I mean? They're still gonna fuck with somebody who gets pulled over in the hood before they fuck with anybody else, and especially they just smoking weed or whatever. It's like, that's enough to get you fucked with and rolled up and violate you, you know what I mean? And it's just not right. There still needs to be a change there and a delineation between like, yo, look, this is a nonviolent act. People, you know, are not hurting nobody. Yeah, you get caught with whatever, 100, 200 pounds or whatever it is, an ounce, whatever. That should just be a fix-it ticket. You know, maybe you got to pay some back taxes on that product, whatever it is. But it should not be people doing time in jail and affecting their family and their livelihoods and setting their whole life back. You know what I mean? Now, people don't deserve that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I've seen you use your platform to advocate for this, and I'm sure having done your time for it and being part of that case, like, definitely kind of lit that fire in you as well to, like, pay that forward to other people. Because I believe there's somebody that you've posted about a lot that you're close to. I can't recall his name right now, but he did, like, 20 plus years for weed.
Yeah, he did 30 years.
What was his name again?
Richard DeLisi. He was one of the longest serving cannabis prisoners in the United States. And God bless Richard. He's out now doing his thing. Has got like a brand going and is starting to make some money legally off of it. And man, I mean, that's like somebody who really, you know, shit is paid his way in sweat and time and blood and loss. I mean, I was really close with his son, so I watched how it affected his whole family and his son and everything, and to see what it did just close hand, you know, up in front. And me and his son would always talk about like, damn, how are we going to get your dad out and shit like that, you know, and to finally kind of like actually have a hand kind of in moving that forward, you know, was like a blessing, honestly. So I was able to kind of like alley-oop his case to the Last Prisoner Project. The Last Prisoner Project went ahead and started advocating for his release. And 2 years or like a year later, we was able to get him out, you know, and this is after he basically had a life sentence, you know what I mean?
Yeah, a life sentence for trees wow. And he served over 30, you said?
Yeah.
I can't imagine
31, 32 years he served
trees.
For trees, you know what I mean? So, and there's still people in jail for it in some of these states. We're just not hearing about it. Their stories aren't getting out there. And that's the sort of thing that is close to my heart. After doing 6 months, which feels like 6 years in there, nobody should lose their freedom.
I don't like doing 6 minutes, man.
That's what I'm saying. It's your freedom you're speaking of. So it's like one of those things like, you know, people's stories, you know, people are sitting inside right now in these same circumstances right now that don't have a voice, and they don't want them to have a voice either. And, you know, I mean, it's just a shame because right now there's a ton of big business out here making a ton of money, and I'm all for that. But at the same time, we also got to, you know, take care of the people that are, you know, still affected by this kind of unjust laws and stuff, you know.
Well said, bro. Well said. Very inspiring. After you came home, was that a point where you decided, you know what, I kind of got to make some changes and pivot a little bit and forge a new chapter for myself? For
sure. You know what I mean? When I got back, I really got into just music, video direction. So I really heavily just dove in onto just filming and directing and just editing and just getting my chops up, and photography. I'm just really passionate about creative stuff. I also came back and just really into cooking. You know, I mean, I'm super passionate about cooking and just different cuisines and flavors. So, and expressing myself as an artist that way, and ultimately just like learning more and more mediums to just express myself essentially, you know, and that's photography, video, music, creating new strains of cannabis. Lately, I've just been mainly focused on like breeding and creating new stuff, you know what I mean? And then also just art too. And I got a lot of art projects I got, you know, kind of in the background I'm doing, and just ultimately just being creative. I'm just a creative person, and that's how I want to just kind of make my living and express myself and bring cool projects to the culture and the community and people and the public that, you know, that maybe could appreciate them and maybe learn or be inspired, you know?
No doubt. You have a lot of, like, aesthetic tastes that are very, I noticed, like, you know, I'm a similar way. I'm a big art guy, whether it's cinema, whether it's photography, whether it's graffiti. And so I definitely noticed that about you, too. I remember, like, well, let's also go through the timeline, right? It's interesting when medical marijuana came out for the first time, when they called it the club, the Cannabis Club. You're a member of the Cannabis Club.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I'm finna go to the Cannabis Club. I remember when that came out, the dispensaries first came out, it it was like, blood, there's a store.
Yeah,
Like, there's a whole store, blood. It just got jars, and you could go in there, blood, and just go see the doctor, blood, and have him write you a note, blood. Like, you can go. It's like, what? Really? And you go in there, and it's like brownies and Rice Krispie treats and edibles and like literally jars of any strain. Like, what do you think about the whole process as California in particular has gone from that medical process to now all the way recreational?
So it's interesting because I left the country when it kind of really started to happen. So I was actually friends with Dennis Perone and, used to do some business with him back in the day before he opened up his club on Market Street in Church. It was like one of the first clubs in San Francisco. So Dennis Perone was obviously a pioneer and one of those people who was pushing to change some of the laws. And at the same time, Steve D'Angelo was over in Oakland and opening clubs and going through his own legal issues at the same time, like when I had left the country. So when I left the country, it was like Dennis Perone was going, Steve D'Angelo, other people, everybody was like making this push, towards legalization and opening shops and kind of regularizing and normalizing cannabis. And then to come back, in like 2010 is when I came back. And at that point, that's kind of when, Prop 216, all this shit, like everything really, Prop 64, like it all kind of like started to, change and kind of like people started to really come out of the woodwork and come out with brands now. You're starting to see way more brands, way more stuff. And, I like, when I got back, I was like on probation for 3 years. So 2013 is kind of when I had freed up and finally could kind of like trying to get back on my feet and figure out what I was going to do and how I was going to go about, doing my thing. And I was still kind of just, reluctant to even bring my brand back. At the time, I was just like, oh, shit,
it's like a bad association.
Yeah,
almost.
the association and stuff like that. And then, I'm like, hey, you know what I mean? I'm like, that's part of my past. I ain't got nothing to hide. I'm just doing what I do. I'm a positive person and trying to bring good stuff to the community. So I said, man, that's when I started cultivating and, trying to build the brand and find different ways to brand it and message it and how to bring my story back to light, So it's been a whole process of looking back into my own history and figuring out like what I stand for, what am I about, what is this brand about, you know what I mean? And ultimately it comes down to like my own struggles and my own, passage, like rite of passage that I've had to go through, kind of like almost like a quest for fire, damn near, you know what I mean? Of like the phoenix, like rising from the ashes. So, I was up, I went all the way back down to like, nothing. And then just coming back and just trying to rebuild as a person, you know what I mean? And find my own lane and kind of like, and create this brand and bring my vision and my my dreams and my vision to life of like what I'm trying to do with it, you know what I mean? And it's like it's not easy as like initially kind of as a one-man show, one-man army. People don't believe in your vision or see your thing, you know what I mean? Not everybody's gonna like believe in your shit. So it just goes to show how important it is for you to kind of believe in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And see it through and really don't give up. You know what I mean? Is really what it comes down to. And if you put in enough hours and are really passionate and really about whatever it is you're trying to do, you're going to get it,
Well said, man. I mean, I think sometimes people from the outside looking in, they think this shit is easy, or they think certain people owe what they have to certain opportunities that they might not have had. But at the end of the day, it's like there's no such thing as a magic wand of success.
Man.
It really all boils down to hard work and a positive mental attitude and doing the right thing and trusting the process. And I see you moving in that direction. We're talking about the decriminalization of weed. We're talking about medical to recreational. We're talking about the corporatization of it. It's such a weird thing. I'm kind of conflicted because while I don't miss the negative impacts like the prison times and stuff like that for people, it's a trip now. Like you said, everybody smokes weed, right? And it's just something about that whole, like you said, getting with your partners and putting a few dollars together and grabbing a 20 sack that's gonna have 6 heads on it.
Yeah.
That's gonna get all of them lifted for like a few hours.
Yeah.
As opposed to now you go into a studio session, it's like 6 people smoking 4 gram backwood blunts.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just insane.
Wild.
It's wild, man.
It's definitely another.
What do you think, bro? Good, bad?
I mean, I have to say, you know what I mean? It's good that everybody's discovering it. You know what I mean? I remember back in like the early, I don't know, must have been late 80s, early 90s. I remember my brother was like, man, I'm stopping smoking weed. Too many people is doing this shit. They can have it type of thing. I'm almost like that too. Like, you know what? All you motherfuckers could have this shit. I'm fucking retiring, you know what I mean? You can have this weed shit. But ultimately, it's good and it's bad. It's, as an entrepreneur, it's like, you got to kind of get up every day and just like force yourself to do this shit. And like nobody else is going to do it for you. You got to like, persevere and just follow through on this stuff. And it is interesting, like you say, though, with the overconsumption maybe of stuff. Like it isn't really about always smoking the weed and having like a competition about how much weed,
Yeah, I don't like that
smoke.
Type of shit, man.
Honestly, it's about like
I don't like smoking with those type of people either,
it's
man.
like smoke weed and go honestly enjoy yourself and do something positive, because ultimately it's about like what you do with that energy that you get from the plant and the gift that it is, because it opens up a certain portal for creativity and for a different perspective, you know what I mean? So you got to utilize that. When you first get that spark of energy, maybe you first light up and you're like, man, I'm inspired. That's a lot of like when Dre was smoking the champagne in the studio and smoking the Champelli, it was like, man, he was inspired by that herb and went and created amazing stuff with it. So it's really about what you do with it. Now it's become, smoking has become the sport. And honestly, it's kind of, hey, each his own. I have my moments where I'm smoking a ton of weed back to back, so I ain't down on nothing. But at the same time, like, what my advice would be is to use that energy and focus it into other more positive things if you're gonna smoke. So make it almost like a reward. I'm gonna smoke, but I'm gonna go do this. I'm gonna create, I'm gonna do some exercise, I'm gonna go jump on a bike, I'm gonna go. And that's kind of like what, my brand is about. I want it to be like what you do once you smoke the weed, you know what I mean?
I see that in your brand, and I think that's, that's something that I think is actually pretty cool about what's going on now is the branding and the art of it. Like even these bags that you brought today are like really cool looking. They got your design. As I said, like you have a really good eye for design. I think that comes across in your brand. The different shapes of the bag, the different ideas for flavors. I think that really helps people stand out. And I think it helps people who are entrepreneurs touch into like more creative energy,
For sure. That is like, we look towards different brands to be like, and different people and artists to be kind of to find inspiration and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So I definitely I kind of want to use my platform and my voice and my brand to try to inspire, however I can. Marketing and branding and some of the colors and just in general, the aesthetic is like one of those vehicles for doing it. And then at the same time, like ultimately, other stuff that I want to bring to the table that's just, in the works that I want to bring to the light, and just more and more ways to try to inspire and make change and just, and try to just keep it interesting and shake it up a little bit out here, do something different,
Yeah, and how involved are you in like the actual cultivation these days?
So lately, nowadays, it's like I'm basically more of like going and working with cultivation partners. So I'm curating menus. I'm like making genetics and then bringing it to people who could cultivate, So I'm always looking for good cultivation partners that can actually grow that top level, top tier stuff, because not everybody can grow like on point nowadays. So it's really become like subtle differences, because herb is one of those things that's like very subtle nuances.
It's a very sensitive plant.
It's a sensitive plant, and you could give one person one cut of it, a clone, and you give everybody that same clone, and it's going to come out different with everybody. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things that's like a living, it's a living entity, you know what I mean? So it's all the energy a lot of why it is commercial in the way it is, and it's coming out like just regular, looks good, but it don't smoke good, is it's that energy that's going into it is missing some of that, heart and soul. Whereas like the people back in the day, it would just be, they would have a 2-lighter in a closet with a couple plants and that shit would taste amazing. You'd be like, damn, I need more of that. You'd be like, no, I only got like, 1 light in my closet, but it'd be the most amazing weed. Now people got 1,000 lights, 2,000 lights.
Yeah.
So it's going to affect the quality, you know what I mean? Unless you're really good and you know how to like break it up and take care of everything and give everything its proper attention and nutrients and the right balance, and if you don't do that correctly, your shit ain't going to be smoking.
Yeah, I mean, and then especially when you have like these, that's the one thing that is kind of disturbing to me about the legalization is just the corporate giants that have stepped into the space and pushed out the little guy, that people like yourself who like this culture would not be where it is today without some of your contributions. And then when you have a company that's strictly for profit, growing for mass consumption in like big indoor factory farms.
Yeah.
I mean,
so it's kind of losing what, this is all about as far as cannabis. Cannabis has always been about like, being mindful and change. And I mean, even you could even equate it and equate it with like environmentalism and shit and being more mindful with our environment and treating stuff, the earth and stuff like that coming out of the 60s and 70s. Like that's like what was enlightening people and making people see different alternatives and trying different ways of living and shit like that. And what is happening now is, like you say, a lot of people's stories and a lot of people who put in that groundwork for the industry and, in this, this modern day cannabis business to be where it is right now do go unnoticed. And a lot of those stories are getting lost. And a lot of that stuff is not, people aren't getting, their proper due respect and, proper due. And I'm not speaking on myself. I'm fine with what I'm doing and everything, but I'm just saying in general, there's a lot of stories and a lot of people I know, people that have done time in jail, people's families have been broken down, a lot of communities, a lot of people that have been, just not, left out, you know what I mean, in a sense, and that have all, suffered and had a hand in this. Because the way I look at it is everybody has a hand in culture, whatever it is, whether it's cannabis or music or art or whatever. Like if you're involved in it, you have a hand in that evolution of that culture and that community, you know what I mean? So for myself, speaking for myself, it's like, man, I've been living and breathing this since day one, it's like all I know damn near in a way. It's like what I've been doing forever, you know what I mean? For example, and I've had a hand in shaping, like hands-on, like that's, I know every facet of this. There's not too many people that could say they've been doing this weed shit for 35 years, like all the way, like deep in it, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and to be now, so it's like, it's one of those things to be at this point, you know what I mean? For myself, I'm just trying to get my brand in its place and where I think I feel like it needs to be, you know what I mean? And but yeah, there's still a lot of work to be done with bringing other people's stories to light and making sure it's a just system and people really, get their chance and their fair crack at some of this, you know what I mean?
Part of what is coming to mind is just that sense of community. And that's why I feel like when the weed culture was this underground thing, as I saw it in the Bay, it's like when not everybody was smoking, it's like you were kind of all in on this thing. And it was a more personal thing where you literally had to know somebody to get it. Now, it's like you might as well be ordering a Big Mac, Yeah. It's crazy to see all the dispensaries in L.A. It's like a dispensary on every block in L.A.
If you look at it in terms of this, think of like, mom and pop music stores, like creative music, for example, creative music. So like, it's one of those things that it got centralized. The power got centralized or is getting centralized right now in cannabis. So it's like back in the day, it was like all the little weed dealers I used to go over to homie's house and it was like a whole culture. You go over there, you would hang out, he'd be like, oh, I've got a few different weeds.
You
and
might
it'd be
meet
like
somebody else there.
it was literally like it was like a dispensary thing, but without the legalization thing. Where you go over to the homie's house, everybody be sitting around talking, creating community in a sense. You know what I mean? You'd pick up a little weed, meet some people, go for a bike ride, go whatever. Just is that. But like once it went to dispensaries and it got like decentralized kind of in that way, or I don't know how you would describe it, but it definitely was that was that shift that we're talking about from communities like your local. Like they used to have a T-shirt, a bumper sticker, like support your local weed dealer, you know what I mean? Support your local dealer. Like that's gone now in a sense, you know what I mean? Now it's all dispensaries and stuff, which is fine. But at the same time, it's like, you still got to remember where it came from, and people can't forget like what this was born out of, you know what I mean? And how it got to where it is now. And on the backs of a lot of people's work in order for it to get where it's at ultimately.
Absolutely,
you know what I mean?
bro. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you're able to transition. Now you're entering this space. You're pushing your brand, you're pushing your line, you're able to bring some of that authenticity into the limelight. And I'm really glad that you came here today. This has been a fascinating conversation, bro.
For sure, my brother, man. It's been a pleasure, man.
Yeah, man.
You're an old soul, a young cat that's deep with knowledge and just, man, and just taking the time to go through these stories and with these people and bring stuff to light. That like that's a perfect example of like what you're doing right there, making sure people's stories are told.
Absolutely.
And the knowledge is passed on. You know what I mean? And that's a big part of it right now. So like these newer generations can learn, because a lot of people ain't they ain't getting the right messages or the right knowledge right now, and a lot of people aren't teaching them like the positive shit. You know what I mean?
Right on, man. That's what it's all about. I really hope that like in 10 years, as the cannabis game gets even crazier, people can look back on this exact podcast and get some insight.
For sure, my brother. Definitely, man.
So anything else you want to mention, plug specifically that's coming out soon?
I mean, I'd have to say, I got a lot of stuff going on with clothing stuff right now. A lot of like old and new music coming out. A lot of new different genetics that I've been making over the last 2 years. I got like a lot of new cool, different new genetics coming up. So definitely follow the brand, Champelli.co. It has a store finder there, so you can literally go in and find different dispensaries. You can also buy, all the clothing in different drip. I like to have my hand in cut and sew and design, and a lot of the stuff that I'm making is like really kind of personalized and has my own touch on it. And I'm trying to make them, them one-off pieces that you like to wear every day, kind of your favorite piece. But, stay tuned and look for the Champelli, products. This is the Cassis. We're getting ready to do a drop with that. You know what I mean? We got the Modiano, for example. This is another one right there. The Modiano, the Ropium. That's based off the old school rope.
Rope.
You know what I mean? There's a Bay Area term right there, the rope, smoking rope. You know what I mean? The Exclusivo. You know what I mean? And then I got a ton of different gummies coming. The Cassis. I got the watermelon coming. You know what I mean? All these different flavors, just trying to bring flavors and different terps. The Limonada, which is a lemon thing. The Aranciata, which is an orange joint. You know what I mean? So we're going to have gummies. And then ultimately, I'm all about the terps with the tree stuff, like, unique terps, different flavors, trying to bring new flavor profiles, not the same old shit that you've been smoking, you know what I mean? Got the hash holes, which is a wave right now. Everybody fucking with these hash holes, just like an infused pre-roll or rosin, for example, you know what I mean? But yeah, just lots of new flavors coming with the brand. So Champelli.co, and then just straight Champelli on Instagram if y'all want to follow. Man, it's all love. It's just a big family, just trying to grow and build with good people. You know what I mean? And make change out here. You know what I mean? Positive change.
Amazing, bro. Thank you
For
so
sure.
much
Thank
for
you
coming
guys,
through
man.
and
Thank you
blessing
guys.
us. And thank you to everybody who's watching. I want to take a second just to say we get so many supporters from all over the world. The team is super locked in. We're all committed to doing some positive stuff with this platform. And you people out there watching, commenting, liking, subscribing, following, copping merchandise, checking out our sponsors. All you guys are part of this family with the history of the Bay. Support the home team. Support your local weed dealer. And let's keep getting it, man. Let's keep doing this. We just hit 21 episodes. We're going to do 2100 before this thing is all over, man. Much love, y'all. Champelli is in the building, and we out. Yee! Recognize where you got the game. We got our own style, got our own slang. Northern California is a West Coast thing. This is the history of the Bay. Recognize where you got the game. We got our own style, got our own slang. Northern California is a West Coast thing. This is the history of the Bay.